The village of Asantman, nestled amidst green hills and bustling with the vibrancy of Ghanaian culture, seemed like a peaceful haven. But for 15-year-old Kezia Afrain, it became the setting of a nightmare that would haunt her for years. It was a Friday evening, the air fragrant with the aroma of fried plantains and groundnut soup wafting from nearby homes. Kezia was walking back from the river after fetching water, her laughter still echoing in her mind from a joke a friend had told her earlier. She was carefree, her two braids swinging as she hummed a tune, the cool clay pot balanced expertly on her head. She was about 10 minutes away from home when she noticed them, Paul and Samuel, two boys she had seen around the village but never spoken to. They were older, in their early 20s, and known for their unruly behavior. Still, Kezia thought nothing of it when they called out to her.
"Yai, Kezia. Beautiful Kezia, won't you stop and talk to us?"
Paul called out, his smile wide but unsettling.
Good evening.
She replied politely, quickening her steps. But they didn't let her pass. Samuel stepped into her path, his tall frame blocking her way.
Don't rush, small girl. We just want to talk.
Her heart skipped a beat. The tone of his voice wasn't friendly. It was taunting, predatory. Kezia tried to move around him, but Paul grabbed her arm.
Let me go!
She shouted, her voice trembling with fear.
"No need to shout.
Paul said, his grip tightening.
We're all friends here, aren't we?"
The laughter that followed sent chills down her spine. Kezia screamed for help, her voice echoing through the empty path, but no one came. The village was quiet, the usual hum of life fading as night settled. In a blur of terror, they dragged her into a secluded area near the bushes. Kezia fought with all her strength, kicking and scratching, but they were too strong. Her cries pierced the night, but they fell on deaf ears. When it was over, Kezia lay on the ground, her clothes torn, her spirit shattered. Paul and Samuel disappeared into the darkness, leaving her broken and alone. Tears streamed down her face as she struggled to her feet, clutching the clay pot that now seemed impossibly heavy. She stumbled back to her house, her legs trembling beneath her. When her mother, Mrs. Afrain, saw her, the pot crashing to the ground was the only sound that broke the silence.
Kezia! What happened?
Her mother cried, rushing to her side. Kezia couldn't speak. She collapsed into her mother's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. Her father, hearing the commotion, ran out of the house.
"Who did this to you?"
He roared, his voice thick with rage. Kezia could barely whisper their names.
Paul. Samuel.
The Afrain family went to the village chief the next morning, demanding justice. But justice was elusive. Paul and Samuel came from influential families in the village, and the elders, swayed by bribes and pressure, refused to take decisive action.
"They are young boys,"
one elder said dismissively.
"Why ruin their future over a single mistake?"
Kezia's father slammed his fist on the table.
"And what about my daughter's future? Has anyone thought of that?"
But their pleas fell on deaf ears. Paul and Samuel roamed the village freely, unrepentant, while Kezia became the subject of gossip and whispers. 2 months later, Kezia's world crumbled further when her mother noticed her unusual weight gain and constant nausea. A visit to the village nurse confirmed their worst fear. Kezia was pregnant. Kezia broke down, her wails echoing through the small clinic.
Why, God? Why me?
She cried, pounding her fists against the walls. Her mother held her tightly, tears streaming down her own face.
It's not your fault, my child. Don't blame yourself.
But Kezia couldn't hear her. All she could think about was the life growing inside her, a constant reminder of that night. The days that followed were a blur of pain and isolation. Kezia refused to leave the house, ashamed of the stares and whispers from the villagers. Her father grew quieter, his anger simmering beneath the surface. Her mother became her only source of comfort, spending hours by her side, reassuring her that they would get through this together. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Kezia sat by the window, staring into the distance. Her mother approached her, placing a hand on her shoulder.
Kezia,
She said gently,
your father and I have decided. After the baby is born, you will go to Canada to live with your grandparents. You need a fresh start, away from here.
Kezia turned to her mother, her eyes filled with despair.
What about the baby? I don't know if I can love it. How can I?
Her mother's eyes softened.
We will love the baby. We will raise it as our own. You need to focus on healing, my child.
Months later, Kezia gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. The first time she held Abigail, she felt a mixture of love and pain. She looked into her daughter's innocent eyes and wondered how something so pure could come from such darkness. The decision to leave was not easy, but Kezia knew it was the right one. With a heavy heart, she kissed Abigail goodbye and boarded the plane to Canada, leaving behind her past and the village that had failed her. As the plane soared into the sky, Kezia looked out the window, tears streaming down her face. She vowed to rebuild her life, no matter how broken she felt. What she didn't know was that her journey of healing had only just begun. Years passed, but the memory of that fateful night never truly left Kezia. In Canada, she worked hard to rebuild her life. Living with her grandparents, she excelled in her studies, threw herself into a career in nursing, and began to piece together a sense of self-worth. Yet, despite her achievements, the trauma lingered like a shadow that refused to leave. Back in Ghana, Kezia's daughter, Abigail, was growing up under the loving care of Kezia's parents. Abigail became the joy of the Ephraim household, her laughter filling the once quiet home. Kezia would send letters, money, and pictures, but she always felt a twinge of guilt for being so far away. One evening, during a phone call with her mother, Kezia asked the question she had been dreading.
How's Abigail doing? Is she asking about me?
Her mother sighed.
She's doing well, Kezia. She's a smart girl, top of her class. But yes, she does ask about you. She wants to know why you're not here.
The guilt hit Kezia like a wave.
What do you tell her?
We tell her you're working hard to build a better future for both of you.
Her mother replied softly.
But, Kezia, she needs her mother. When will you come home?
Kezia's voice trembled.
I don't know, Ma. I don't know if I'm ready to face everything again.
Her mother's tone grew firm.
It's been 10 years, Kezia. You can't run forever. Abigail needs to know her mother. And you need to confront your past, or it will haunt you forever.
My heart told myself I'd never let the past restart. But here you stand, love in your hands, trying to make me understand. I see the echoes of where I've been, a story carved into my skin. Can I move past the fire and ash, or will I let this moment crash?
That night, Kezia lay awake, her mind racing. She thought about Abigail, now a teenager, and the bond they had yet to form. She thought about her parents, who had sacrificed so much to raise Abigail. Most of all, she thought about herself and the fear that gripped her every time she imagined returning to Asantman. After weeks of agonizing over the decision, Kezia finally booked a flight home. The day of her arrival was bittersweet. Her parents and Abigail were waiting at the airport, their faces lighting up when they saw her. Kezia's heart swelled with emotion as she embraced her parents. But when she turned to Abigail, the young girl hesitated.
Abigail.
Kezia said, her voice cracking.
It's me, your mother.
Abigail studied her for a moment before smiling shyly.
You look different from the pictures.
Kezia laughed through her tears.
Well, I've aged a little.
The drive back to the village was filled with awkward but heartfelt conversation. Kezia learned about Abigail's favorite books, her love for music, and her dream of becoming a doctor. Abigail, in turn, asked about Canada, her mother's life there, and why she had been away for so long. As the weeks passed, Kezia and Abigail began to bond. Kezia tried her best to make up for lost time, attending Abigail's school events and helping with her studies. But the closer they grew, the more Kezia felt the weight of the truth she had been hiding. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Abigail turned to her mother.
Mama,
She began hesitantly.
why did you leave me?
Kezia's heart sank. She had been dreading this moment.
I didn't leave you, Abigail.
She said softly.
I had to go because I needed to heal. Something bad happened to me before you were born, and I wasn't strong enough to stay.
Abigail frowned.
What happened?
Kezia hesitated, tears welling in her eyes.
It's a story for another time. Just know that I love you, and I've always loved you.
Kezia thought she could keep the past buried, but fate had other plans. During a village festival, she spotted a familiar face in the crowd, Paul. Her breath caught in her throat as memories of that night came rushing back. He was older now, his hair speckled with gray, but his presence was as menacing as ever. Kezia froze, panic taking hold. Her father noticed her discomfort and followed her gaze.
That's him, isn't it?
He asked quietly. Kezia nodded, her hands trembling.
What's he doing here? I thought he left the village.
Her father's face darkened.
He came back a few years ago. He's a changed man now, or so people say. He's married and has children of his own.
Kezia clenched her fists.
He doesn't deserve peace. Not after what he did to me.
Her father placed a hand on her shoulder.
I know, my daughter. But holding on to this anger will only hurt you more.
Kezia avoided Paul for weeks, but the past refused to stay hidden. One day, Abigail excitedly told her about a young man she had met, a kind, thoughtful guy named Jacob.
He's wonderful, Mama.
Abigail gushed.
I think you'll really like him.
But when Kezia finally met Jacob, her world came crashing down. He was Paul's son.
You can't see him anymore.
Kezia blurted out, her voice shaking. Abigail's smile faded.
Why not? What's wrong with him?
It's not him.
Kezia said, struggling to keep her composure.
It's his father.
Abigail frowned.
What does his father have to do with us?
Kezia took a deep breath, the weight of the truth pressing down on her.
Because his father is the reason I left this village. He hurt me in ways I can never forget.
The revelation rocked Abigail's world. She couldn't believe the man she loved was connected to her mother's trauma. But as she processed the truth, she realized she couldn't punish Jacob for his father's sins.
Mama,
Abigail said one evening.
I love Jacob. And I know you're hurt, but he's not his father. Please don't make me choose between you and him.
Kezia wrestled with her emotions, torn between protecting her daughter and letting go of her pain. Finally, she decided to meet with Paul. When they sat face to face, Paul looked genuinely remorseful.
Kezia,
He said, his voice low.
I can never undo what I did to you. But I've spent years trying to be a better man. Please, don't let my mistakes ruin our children's happiness.
Tears streamed down Kezia's face.
You stole my innocence, Paul. You broke me.
I know,
He said, his own eyes glistening.
and I will carry that guilt for the rest of my life. But Jacob loves your daughter. Give them the chance to build something good.
The next day, Kezia did something she never thought she'd do. She went to Paul's house and asked to speak with Jacob. When he appeared, nervous and unsure, Kezia took a deep breath.
Jacob,
She began.
I need you to promise me something. Promise me that you'll love my daughter, protect her, and never cause her the kind of pain your father caused me.
Jacob, his eyes filled with sincerity, nodded.
I promise, ma'am. I love Abigail, and I'll do everything in my power to make her happy.
Kezia nodded, tears streaming down her face. For the first time in years, she felt a small weight lift off her shoulders. While the scars of her past would never fully heal, she realized that love and forgiveness could pave the way for a brighter future. She found out after a DNA test that Paul was not the father of Abigail, rather, Samuel was her father. Samuel had passed on in a fatal accident few years ago before Kezia's arrival to Asantman. And in that moment, as Abigail and Jacob embraced her with gratitude, Kezia finally found peace. Months later, Kezia invited Jacob over for dinner. It was an awkward meal at first, but as the evening went on, Kezia began to see the man Jacob truly was: kind, respectful, and nothing like his father.
I see why Abigail loves you.
Kezia admitted as they cleared the table.
You're not your father, Jacob. And I shouldn't have judged you for his actions.
Jacob nodded, his heart swelling with relief.
Thank you, Miss Kezia. I promise to always treat Abigail with the love and respect she deserves.
Years later, Abigail and Jacob married in a small, intimate ceremony. Kezia stood by her daughter's side, smiling as Abigail walked down the aisle. Though the past would never be forgotten, it no longer held them captive. Kezia found peace in knowing her daughter's love was built on kindness and trust, not pain and betrayal. And as she watched Abigail and Jacob exchange vows, she felt hope bloom in her heart, a hope for a future defined not by scars, but by love and healing.
Can love be enough to make this right? Oh, I wanna let go. I wanna believe that love can erase what's been haunting me. Though the past still lingers, I choose to breathe through the...
In the vast wilderness, where the rivers ran wild and the forests stretched endlessly beyond the horizon, two towns stood side by side, Elder and Varden. More than just neighbors, they were twin souls in the great expanse, thriving as one. There, people shared their harvests, fought their enemies together, and celebrated life's joys as if they were one great family. There was no border between them, only a well-trodden path where merchants from Elder brought their finest grains and artisans from Varden traded their elegant crafts. The sound of laughter always filled the air, and at night, the town's fires burned like twin beacons under the same sky. Elder and Varden were inseparable, brothers, bonded by time and trust. Their kings, Roderick of Elder and Hadrian of Varden, had grown up as dear friends, their fates intertwined since childhood. It was their greatest wish that their sons, Prince Aldric of Elder and Prince Selim of Varden, would continue this legacy of brotherhood. And for a time that wish came true. Aldric and Selim were inseparable. They trained together in swordplay, their wooden blades clashing in friendly duels before they could even lift real steel. They hunted deep in the wilderness, racing through the trees, laughing breathlessly as they chased after stags and wild hares. They made oaths beneath the starlit sky that no matter what, their bond would never break. But fate was a cruel mistress, one that knew no loyalty. One fateful day, as Aldric rode through the marketplace of Varden, he saw her. Elira. She was unlike any maiden he had ever seen, a vision of grace and beauty. Her golden hair glowed in the afternoon sun, her voice a melody that danced through the air. As she moved through the bustling crowd, the people seemed drawn to her. Children ran to her with smiles, merchants greeted her with warmth. There was something about her, something that pulled at his soul, as though the universe itself had conspired for him to see her in that moment. His heart pounded. Without hesitation, he approached her, his voice steady, yet his pulse raced.
My lady, I am Aldrich of Elder.
Elira turned to him, and when she smiled, it was as if the very air around them shimmered.
I know who you are, my prince,
she said with a playful tilt of her head. In that instant, Aldrich knew this was love. And when he confessed his admiration, she listened, her cheeks flushed, her eyes alight with something warm and soft. And then, with a gentle nod, she accepted. But across the town, unseen and unheard, another heart shattered. Prince Selim had loved Elira for as long as he could remember. From the moment they were children, he had watched her grow into the woman she was now. He had loved her laughter, her kindness, the way she treated even the lowliest beggar as an equal. But Selim had waited. He had wanted the moment to be perfect, the timing right. Now, that moment would never come. The news struck Selim like a sword to the chest. He had trusted Aldrich with his life, had seen him as a brother, and yet Aldrich had unknowingly stolen the one thing he held most dear. That night, Selim stood alone in the quiet of the Varden Palace gardens, his fists clenched as he stared at the stars. How could Aldrich not have known? How could fate be so cruel? The next morning, the air in Varden was different. People whispered. The tension was a slow, creeping storm, threatening to break. And when Selim and Aldrich's eyes finally met again, the warmth between them had turned to ice. For the first time in history, the bond between Elder and Varden wavered, and neither prince knew if it could ever be mended again. The air between Elder and Varden was no longer filled with songs of unity, nor with the laughter of children playing in the open fields that connected the two towns. Instead, a heavy silence lingered, a silence bred from whispers of heartbreak and betrayal. The once brotherly bond between Prince Aldrich of Elder and Prince Selim of Varden had been fractured, and the people could feel the growing divide. The elders of both towns knew that if left unchecked, this rift could fester into something far worse, perhaps even war. And so, they convened in the sacred council chamber, where decisions of great importance had been made for generations. Their solution was one that would test not only the prince's strength, but their endurance, wisdom, and patience.
They must build,
declared one of the elders in the palace then.
A home, standing on the border of both towns. A home that will serve as a testament to their will and determination. When the great storm of the rainy season arrives, the house that remains standing will declare the victor.
It was a trial of skill, endurance, and fate itself. No swords would be drawn, no blood would be spilled. Instead, stone and mortar would decide the fate of love. The decree spread through both towns, and while the people welcomed it as a fair alternative to war, it did not erase the bitterness that had settled in the hearts of the two young men. Aldrich and Selim did not argue. They did not resist. They simply nodded, accepting their fate, and set to work. From the break of dawn to the dead of night, the two princes labored tirelessly. Their hands, once meant for wielding swords and guiding their people, now bore blisters from carrying stones and cutting timber. The border between Elder and Varden, once a place of unity and shared festivities, had become a battlefield of silent rivalry. Villagers from both towns gathered on either side, watching with anticipation, whispering among themselves, placing silent wagers on who would succeed. Aldrich worked with careful precision, ensuring that every stone he laid was perfectly placed, every beam strong enough to withstand the storms to come. His house was a fortress in the making, steady, structured, and deeply rooted in its foundation. Selim, however, built with sheer force and passion. He drove nails into wood with unyielding determination, working at a relentless pace, as if he could hammer away the heartache that gnawed at him. His home was grand, ambitious, its towering walls a testament to his burning desire to prove himself. Though they did not speak, their competition was evident in every brick they laid. The rivalry, once a playful bond in childhood, had now become something neither of them had ever wished for. But the tension was not lost on the people. There were no shared meals, no exchanged glances of mutual respect. Only the rhythmic sounds of construction, stone grinding against stone, hammers striking nails, the occasional grunt of exertion. The rivalry had consumed them, and with each passing day, the invisible wall between them grew taller. Until one afternoon, when the silence was broken. The sun blazed mercilessly overhead, their muscles burned with exhaustion, yet neither prince slowed their pace. Sweat dripped down their brows as they worked, but Aldrich, glancing towards Selim, suddenly paused. Something in his chest ached, not from labor, but from realization. This was not how it was supposed to be. Without thinking, he dropped his tools and took a step toward his old friend. His voice was hoarse, weighed down by something heavier than mere fatigue.
Do we have to do this?
Aldrich's words carried across the space between them.
Must we let love for one woman destroy the love and peace our people have shared for centuries?
Selim froze. His hammer hung in the air for a moment before he slowly lowered it. For the first time in weeks, he met Aldrich's gaze. The question lingered, sinking deep into his soul. And though he did not answer right away, that night, as the fires burned low and the world grew quiet, the words echoed in his mind. Could love truly be worth the cost of brotherhood? The answer, he realized, was one that only he could decide. That night, Selim lay awake beneath the vast expanse of the night sky, the flickering flames of his campfire casting restless shadows on his face. Sleep eluded him. No matter how much he willed his mind to quiet, memories stormed his thoughts. Memories of Aldrich and him as boys, laughing in the fields, training with wooden swords, making promises of brotherhood under these same stars. But now, the silence between them was thick with something heavier than exhaustion. It was resentment, disappointment, loss. The townspeople watched them, whispering in hushed voices. Some said this contest was fate's way of deciding who was the stronger prince. Others feared what would happen if one of them lost. Not just the competition, but the will to remain allies. Would the loser carry bitterness in his heart? Would the bond between Elder and Varden truly survive this? And above all, Selim kept asking himself the one question he had been avoiding.
Was Alira worth losing Aldrich for?
He had loved her for so long, had dreamed of her being by his side. But now, the ache in his chest felt different. It wasn't just heartbreak, it was grief. Grief for the friendship he was losing, for the town that now looked at Elder as a rival instead of a brother. At the same time, Aldrich sat on the unfinished frame of his house, staring at the moon's pale glow. He thought of the moment he had spoken to Alira, how her eyes had sparkled when she smiled at him. It had felt right at the time, but now he was unsure. Had he unknowingly betrayed his brother? His father had always told him that a ruler's greatest strength was not in his sword but in the bonds he forged. What good was winning Alira's love if it came at the cost of everything else? The weight of their decisions hung over them both, and neither could ignore it any longer. When dawn finally arrived, Selim made his choice. With steady steps, he walked toward Aldrich, past the half-built houses, past the curious gazes of the villagers. Aldrich turned, surprised to see him approaching. Selim inhaled deeply before speaking, his voice calm but resolute.
I cannot do this anymore.
Aldrich's brow furrowed.
What do you mean?
I mean this contest. This rivalry. This.
Selim gestured at the unfinished houses.
This madness.
He held Aldrich's gaze, his heart pounding, but his words firm.
I would rather lose Alira than lose you, my brother. I will not let love turn us into enemies.
Aldrich exhaled, as if releasing a breath he had been holding for far too long.
Nor would I, Selim.
He admitted.
Last night I asked myself, if I win, what do I truly gain? And I couldn't answer.
A quiet understanding passed between them, one that spoke of years of trust and shared history. They had fought battles together, protected each other from harm. Why had they so easily allowed love to turn them against each other? When they approached the elders, the news of their decisions spread like wildfire. The contest was over. There would be no storm to decide their fate, no house to crumble under the weight of rain and wind. Instead, the fate of love would rest where it always should have, in the hands of Alira herself. When Alira was told she was free to choose, her eyes filled with tears, not of sorrow, but of admiration. She had always loved Aldrich, for he had been the first to speak his heart to her. And now, seeing the honor in both men, she knew with certainty what her heart had already decided. She chose Aldrich. Selim bowed his head in acceptance, not with resentment, but with the peace of knowing he had not lost a friend, a brother, or the unity of their towns. And so, the bond between Elder and Varden remained unbroken.
The shrill whistle of the train cut through the silence of Eastbridge Station like a knife. A gust of wind stirred the dust, carrying with it the faint scent of oil and metal. Maya stood on the platform, a duffel bag slung over her shoulder and her sketchbook pressed tightly against her chest, as if the pages inside could shield her from what lay ahead. She hadn't been back in 13 years. The station looked the same, and yet entirely different. The same peeling paint, the same wooden benches, the same graffiti scrawled on the ticket booth. Time doesn't wait, but it leaves traces. But something in the air had shifted. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was expectant, like the town itself was holding its breath. She wasn't just here to revisit memories. She was here because her grandmother had vanished. Gone without a word, without a note. One day tending her garden, the next, disappeared. All that was left behind was a half-packed suitcase and an old train schedule circled in red. It led to a station that didn't exist anymore. The station master, an old man with clouded eyes and too many keys hanging from his belt, watched Maya as she bought her ticket.
You sure you want to take this line?
He asked, voice gravelly.
It's the only way.
She replied, trying to sound braver than she felt. He narrowed his eyes, then slowly handed over the ticket.
Mind the stops,
he said.
Not every place on this line lets you come back.
Just then lightning cracked across the sky, though the sun still shone. The train screeched into the station moments later, sleek, silver, and humming like it had a pulse of its own. Maya hesitated at the door. Her phone buzzed, no service. She stepped on board. Behind her, the old station clock stopped ticking. The train jerked forward with a metallic groan, and the world outside began to blur. Trees, fields, distant hills stitched together by the trembling glass. Inside, Maya clutched her sketchbook like an anchor, the sounds of the carriage a strange lullaby of creaks, murmurs, and the rhythmic clatter of wheels on the rails. The train wasn't full, but it felt crowded with silence. Across from her sat a woman in a crimson coat, her face veiled by a black netted hat. She didn't blink, didn't move, just stared at the reflection in the window. Her gloved fingers curled around a cracked locket. Every few minutes, she whispered something under her breath. Maya couldn't quite hear it, but the tone chilled her. Farther down the carriage, a man in a priest's collar clutched a weathered Bible so tightly his knuckles turned white. He glanced up every time they passed through a tunnel, eyes darting like prey sensing a predator. Once, he locked eyes with Maya and flinched, as if he recognized her. Then there was the boy. He sat alone at the far end, staring out the window with a small toy train circling his knees. Unlike the other passengers, he looked alert, almost too alert. His dark eyes flicked from shadow to shadow, following something no one else could see. When Maya offered a small smile, he didn't smile back, but slowly reached down and pushed his toy train toward her seat, letting it glide across the floor. It stopped at her feet. He picked it up. Scratched into the underside were initials. RK. Her father's initials. Her breath caught. The lights flickered. The carriage dimmed for just a second too long. Then the announcement crackled through the speakers, distorted and delayed like a voice speaking through water. The woman in the red coat whispered louder now. Maya caught the words this time.
Not all passengers make it off.
Maya blinked. But when she looked again, the woman was gone. Only the cracked locket remained on the seat. The train screeched to an unexpected halt, metal grinding against metal in a scream that echoed through the trees outside. The lights flickered violently, and when they stabilized, the voice over the speakers came again, warped and whispering.
Unscheduled stop. Disembark only if called.
Maya peered through the window. The platform was swallowed in mist, lit by a single flickering lamp. The signpost was barely visible beneath overgrown ivy and rust, but she caught the name just as the fog parted. Woolgrave Halt. A station that hadn't been on any map for decades. No one else moved. Then the boy stood up. He turned to Maya and simply said,
Next stop, Blackridge. Mind the silence.
We're meant to get off here.
Before she could ask how he knew, he stepped off the train, his toy clutched to his chest. Something inside Maya screamed to follow. Not curiosity, but instinct, the kind that says this is it. She rose, ignoring the cold stares of the other passengers, and stepped into the mist. The air outside felt old, like stepping into a memory not your own. The platform was cracked and splintered, vines crawling over every surface. A lone cat slinked across the tracks, pausing to look at her with unnatural intelligence before vanishing into the brush. The boy walked ahead, silent but certain. They passed the edge of the platform and followed a trail of broken stones and lantern posts into the woods. Maya's heart pounded louder with every step. The trees twisted above them, their branches almost watching. Then through the trees they found it. An abandoned train car, half consumed by nature, sat in a clearing as though it had crashed through time itself. Vines wrapped around its wheels, moss covering the roof like a burial shroud. But the doors were wide open. And on the rusted side, barely legible, were the words. Raj Line. Final passage. Her father's name. Inside the carriage the air felt electric. Cold. Sacred. Dust particles floated like tiny stars in the dim light pouring through broken windows. There were sketches pinned to the walls. Her sketches. Ones she'd drawn as a child. Pages she had torn out and forgotten. And beside them, old train schedules with red circles. The same red her grandmother had used. The boy touched one paper gently.
This is where they go.
He said softly.
The ones who remember too much, or too little.
Maya turned to ask what he meant. But he was gone. Only his toy train remained on the seat beside her. Maya's fingers trembled as she picked up the toy train. It was warm. Too warm, like it had a heartbeat of its own. Outside the abandoned carriage, the forest had gone silent. No wind. No birds. Even her own breath seemed to disappear into the stillness. She stepped deeper into the train car, and the world around her shifted. The moss-covered floor transformed beneath her feet into polished wood. The walls, once rotting and graffiti-covered, now gleamed with brass fixtures and velvet seats. The train was no longer abandoned. It was alive, running. And she wasn't alone. The seats filled slowly, shadows taking shape. A woman with stormy eyes, embroidered lace with fingers too fast for human hands. A man in a war uniform stared at an empty photograph frame. A teenage girl with a cracked mirror whispered her name over and over, trying to recognize her own face. They were all passengers, caught in some strange in-between, some memory loop. And then, at the very end of the car, she saw him. Her father. He sat in full conductor's uniform, cap tilted, a soft smile on his face. But he looked younger than she remembered, closer to her age now than when he vanished. Maya rushed toward him.
Dad?
He looked up surprised but not startled, as if he had been expecting her.
You found the line.
He said softly. Her voice cracked.
You left. You just disappeared. Why? Why didn't you come back?
He sighed, standing slowly.
This line, it doesn't work like the others. You don't ride it with your body. You ride it with memory, regret, love.
He touched her sketchbook, now glowing faintly at her side.
I've been trying to reach you, Maya. You have a gift. Like me. Like your grandmother. That's why she vanished too.
Maya backed away.
No. This is a dream. This isn't real.
He stepped forward.
It's real, but it's not meant to keep you. Only show you what you need to remember.
Suddenly, the lights flickered again, and her father's image glitched like static on a broken screen. The train lurched. A deep rumble echoed from beyond the windows. The shadows around her began to weep, whisper, and some started shouting, desperate to be seen. Her father looked into her eyes, urgent now.
You have to finish the journey. But not for me. For yourself. The last stop. That's where truth lives.
Where is it?
You'll know it when your heart says go back, and your fear says run.
Before she could speak again, the walls splintered, the illusion shattered, and the ghost train collapsed back into ruin. She was alone once more. In the decaying carriage. Only the toy train and her sketchbook glowing faintly in the dark. The forest was no longer quiet. A wind had risen, wild, whispering, wailing. Trees creaked like old bones, and the abandoned train car groaned as if mourning the end of a long-kept secret. Maya stepped out, clutching her sketchbook. The pages were no longer blank or unfinished. They were filled with drawings she didn't remember making. Her father as a young conductor, her grandmother tending to a garden by an unseen station, the boy with the toy train watching her from shadowed corners of the line. The symbols, places, faces, and one final image. A train pulling into a station of light, where time stood still. She followed the trail of lanterns, now blazing with golden fire, deeper into the woods. As she reached a clearing, the air shimmered. A platform appeared where there had been nothing but leaves, glowing with ethereal light. And then came the sound, the deep melodic chime of a bell, not one of warning but of welcome. The last train had arrived. It was unlike any train she'd seen, gleaming like moonlight, made of memory and metal. Its windows shimmered with scenes from the past and possibilities from the future. The door slid open soundlessly. Inside stood the boy. But he wasn't a boy anymore. He looked like her father did in old photos, familiar and calm.
You brought your truth,
he said.
That's the ticket.
Maya hesitated.
What happens if I get on?
You'll understand. Not everything, but enough.
She stepped inside. The train glided soundlessly, not over tracks, but through moments, memories unfolding like pages. She saw her grandmother sitting with a young Maya on her lap, whispering stories of a hidden railway. She saw her father letting go of her hand at the edge of the platform, not out of abandonment, but out of duty. Then she saw herself. She could be. Train slowed.
Your stop,
the boy said. When she stepped off, she was back in Eastbridge. But it was dawn, not dusk. The station was alive with color, like a painting she'd always meant to finish. Her phone buzzed. New message from Grandma. Her knees nearly gave out. She opened her sketchbook one last time. The final page held a drawing she never made. Herself standing at the platform, smiling. Free. The line was gone. But its echo remained. In her heart, in her art, in the gentle hum of truth she would carry forever. It was 9:07 a.m., the exact time Ria always arrived. The small bell above the cafe door chimed. Drawing a quick glance from the barista behind the counter. He didn't need to ask for her order anymore. By the time she reached her favorite corner seat, a cappuccino was already being prepared, extra cinnamon on top, the way she liked it. The cafe was dimly lit, cozy, with a smell of fresh bread and roasted beans thick in the air. A jazz playlist hummed softly in the background, interrupted only by the occasional hiss of the espresso machine or the murmur of hushed conversations. Ria liked that. Noise that didn't demand anything from her. She placed her worn leather journal on the table. Its pages were stuffed with handwritten observations, thoughts, old receipts, and a few photographs she never showed anyone. One of them was of a younger Ria, hand in hand with a boy, her brother, outside a train station. Their smiles were bright, but now it felt like another life. As she opened the journal, her pen hovered over the page, stuck in the same moment she always returned to. The last entry was a list she had never finished. Reasons I left. What I would say if I saw him again. Things that still hurt. Things I pretend don't hurt. She stared at the list for a long moment, then turned the page. Across the cafe, a couple in their 20s were having a quiet argument. Ria couldn't hear the words, but their body language spoke volumes. The crossed arms, the glances toward the exit, the way the girl fiddled with her ring. Ria watched, her eyes tracking every subtle gesture, not with judgment, but with a strange longing. She used to believe in second chances. She wasn't sure anymore. Just then the power flickered, something that happened often during monsoon season. The lights dimmed, then stabilized. But in that split second the atmosphere changed. A baby started crying in a nearby stroller. A man cursed under his breath as he spilled hot coffee on his laptop. And outside, the clouds cracked open, letting loose a heavy, unforgiving rain. Ria didn't flinch. She liked the rain. It meant people stayed longer. And sometimes it meant interesting people showed up. Right on cue, the cafe door opened again. A tall man, slightly drenched despite the umbrella, stepped inside, shaking water from his coat. He scanned the room for an empty seat, and for a split second their eyes met. She quickly looked away. That was the moment that would change everything. But she didn't know that yet. The rain didn't let up for hours. Ria's coffee had gone cold, but she didn't ask for another. She was too caught up watching the man who had taken the seat across from her. He had asked politely when the cafe filled up, and she nodded wordlessly. Normally, she would have offered a stiff smile and returned to her journal. But something about him kept tugging at her attention. He looked like he belonged in an old film. Salt and pepper hair, a kind face, and the kind of unhurried presence that only comes from someone who had lived through enough to stop rushing. He wore a wedding ring, but there was no restlessness in his hands, no frequent checking of his phone. Just a calm presence, and a leather-bound notebook of his own. She noticed that immediately.
Do you come here often?
He asked, with the air of someone who knew it was a cliché but asked anyway.
Every Saturday.
She said.
You?
Never. Until today.
He smiled.
I was supposed to meet someone. She didn't show up.
Ria raised an eyebrow, curious but careful.
A date?
Something like that.
He said. Then, after a pause.
My daughter.
That changed the air between them. There was a heaviness in his tone, a weight carefully tucked beneath the surface of his words. Ria didn't pry, but she nodded, inviting more. He said nothing for a while. Instead, he opened his notebook and pulled out a photo, a young woman in graduation robes, grinning wide.
Last time I saw her, she was 17. She's 26 now.
That struck something deep in Ria. She said nothing at first. Then she asked,
Why now?
He didn't answer right away. Just gave a half shrug.
Because time doesn't ask if you're ready. It just moves on.
The cafe around them kept moving, orders being shouted, the coffee grinder roaring, but in that moment it was quiet between them. Familiar in a strange way. Like two people on opposite sides of the same wound.
I haven't spoken to my brother in 6 years.
Ria said softly, surprising even herself. He turned to her, gently, without judgment.
What would you say if you saw him now?
She laughed under her breath, not from humor, but from the sharp sting of it.
Probably something stupid. Like, nice shoes.
Arif chuckled.
Sometimes that's enough.
They stayed like that for over an hour, strangers linked by invisible threads. The rain still poured outside, washing the windows, making the inside feel like a small world of its own. As Arif stood to leave, he looked at her journal.
You write?
Trying to.
She said.
Write something you're scared to say. That's where the good stuff is.
Then he was gone, just as quietly as he arrived. Ria stared at the empty chair across from her, strangely aware that something had shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but just enough to make her want to come back next Saturday, and wonder if he would too. Ria showed up the following Saturday at 9:07 a.m., as always. She had told herself not to expect anything, but as she ordered her cappuccino, her eyes flicked, almost involuntarily, toward the entrance every few minutes. By 10 a.m., her coffee was half finished and the seat across from her remained empty. She waited another 20 minutes, pretending to write, pretending not to care. But she did. She hated that she did. By 11, the disappointment sat heavy in her chest, like wet fabric clinging to skin. She closed her journal abruptly and stood up. She wasn't even sure where she was going, until she found herself walking back into the cafe 2 days later, on a Wednesday. She wasn't a weekday cafe person, but curiosity has a way of ignoring pride. Cafe was quieter, slower. It was nearly evening, and the soft glow of hanging lights gave the place a warm, cinematic quality. She almost didn't recognize him. Arif was seated near the front window, a cup of tea in front of him, laughing with a young woman. Ria froze. The woman was striking. Hair in a loose bun, animated hands, expressive eyes. She looked like the girl in the photograph Arif had shown her. She looked like family. For a moment, Ria thought they were lovers. But then the woman leaned in and touched his face the way only a daughter does when she's forgiving her father. The lump in Ria's throat rose unexpectedly. She didn't know if it was relief or something else. Envy, maybe. Or recognition. That feeling of watching someone else get the closure you hadn't dared to seek for yourself. She turned to leave quietly. But he saw her. Arif excused himself, jogged over to her at the entrance. His smile was warm, but his eyes held apology.
I should have told you.
She said nothing. He continued.
That day you mentioned your brother, it shook me. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I've been trying to reach her for years, but something about that conversation with you, it made me believe I should try again. I found her on LinkedIn, sent a message. We met last week.
Ria blinked.
You didn't show up because she did.
He nodded.
And I didn't want to break that moment with explanation. It felt fragile, like saying the wrong thing might break it apart.
She looked over at the girl, his daughter, still waiting, still smiling. There was love there, in history, and something raw but healing.
I'm happy for you,
Ria said, but her voice was hollow, not bitter, just distant.
You helped me more than you know,
Arif said gently.
And I hope, one day, you'll make your call too.
She didn't reply. As she walked away, the rain started again, just like the first day they met. But this time, Ria didn't find comfort in it. She felt exposed. The water trickled into her shoes, soaked her sleeves, felt cold, real, undeserved. She went home, pulled out her journal, and opened to the list she had left unfinished. Reasons I left. What I would say if I saw him again. Things that still hurt. Things I pretend don't hurt. That night, she wrote one thing under each line. It was the first time the page looked complete. Ria avoided the cafe for the next 2 weeks. Not because she was angry, but because she wasn't sure what she felt. Arif had found something she didn't think people like them could reclaim. Forgiveness. And it terrified her. She wasn't ready for that level of courage. Not yet. But something kept gnawing at her. The unfinished conversation. The way he had looked at her. Not with pity but with hope. Like he believed she could find her own way back to someone she had once called home. So on the third Saturday she returned. Same table. Same order. But this time, her hands trembled slightly when she reached for her cup. She hadn't even opened her journal when a familiar voice gently interrupted her thoughts.
I saved you a seat.
Arif was back. Different somehow. Lighter. He looked like a man who had been underwater for years and finally surfaced for air. Ria blinked.
You don't usually come on Saturdays.
Maybe I do now.
He said with a small smile.
Can I sit?
She nodded. There was a moment of quiet between them. Not uncomfortable, just full. He finally broke it.
I told her the truth. About the years I missed. About the mistakes I kept justifying. About the fact that I didn't expect forgiveness, but needed to say it anyway.
Ria watched him closely.
What did she say?
She said, I've been waiting to hear that since I was 17. Then she hugged me. And I cried like a fool.
He laughed softly, shaking his head.
In front of half the cafe.
That image hit her like a wave. Arif, vulnerable, cracked open, letting his daughter back in. She looked away, swallowing the knot rising in her throat.
I don't know if I could do that.
She whispered.
I wouldn't know where to start.
Start badly.
He said.
Start with something small. A question. A memory. Even a stupid joke.
She smiled faintly.
Nice shoes?
He laughed.
Exactly.
Ria stared out the window. The rain had stopped, but the air was still wet and thick with the smell of earth. Somewhere across the city, she imagined her brother going about his day, unaware that he was being remembered in a corner cafe by someone who used to know everything about him. His favorite songs, his worst fears, the way he cried when their dog died. She felt the weight of time again. Not as a punishment, but as a gentle nudge.
He called me once.
She said suddenly.
Years ago. I didn't answer. I wasn't ready.
Arif was quiet for a moment.
Maybe now you are.
Ria looked at him, really looked at him. Not as the stranger from a rainy day, but as someone who had shown her that life doesn't have to be linear. That healing can happen in strange places, between cappuccinos and conversations with almost strangers. She nodded slowly.
Maybe.
He smiled, pulled something from his pocket, and handed it to her. A folded napkin with 4 words scrawled in blue ink.
It's never too late.
Ria hadn't planned on making the call. She hadn't even consciously decided to pick up the phone. But when she found herself sitting in her apartment that Saturday morning, staring at the napkin Arif had given her days ago, the words, "It's never too late," floated in her mind like a haunting refrain. Something in her, something deep inside, was calling out. It wasn't fear anymore. It was a kind of strange, tentative hope. It wasn't just the idea of fixing the past that haunted her. It was the understanding that, for so long, she had been holding herself back from the possibility of redemption. And for the first time, the weight of that realization wasn't overwhelming. It was freeing. She picked up her phone. Her fingers hesitated over the number. For a second, the ghosts of past arguments swirled around her. The harsh words, the silence that followed, the time wasted in stubborn pride. She could feel her heart pounding in her throat. But then she dialed. The first ring felt like a lifetime. The second one echoed louder. By the third, the voice on the other end picked up.
Hello.
His voice, familiar but older, cracked a little. It was a sound she had forgotten, one that immediately pulled her into the past, back to days when things had been simpler, less painful. Her throat tightened, but she forced the words out.
Hey, it's me.
There was a silence on the other end. She could hear him breathing, uncertain, hesitant, but not unwelcoming.
Ria.
He asked, the shock clear in his voice.
What's going on?
Her pulse quickened, but she pressed on, every word feeling both foreign and deeply familiar.
I don't know where to start. But I think I want to.
There was a long pause before he responded. His voice softer now.
Start anywhere.
Remember that summer before everything fell apart? Remember when we thought we knew everything?
The memories hit like a storm. Those innocent days, endless laughter, shared secrets, and promises that time had obliterated. The space between them, once filled with easy conversation, was now miles long, but the echoes of those memories never faded.
I remember.
He said quietly.
I've always remembered.
Ria's heart clenched. It had been so long since she had heard him speak that way. Without the bitterness, without the anger. There was something tentative, like he was afraid to let hope resurface. But the rawness of his voice told her that maybe, just maybe, he had been waiting too. She let the silence stretch between them for a moment, gathering the courage to say what had been buried for so many years. She whispered,
I was angry. And I didn't know how to fix it. But I miss you. And I want to try again. Even if it's hard. Even if it's messy.
The words spilled out before she could stop them, raw and unrefined. She didn't expect him to say anything immediately. This wasn't something that could be fixed in an instant. But when he spoke again, there was a kind of softness in his voice that made her feel like the weight of years of silence was finally being lifted.
I miss you too,
he said.
I never stopped, Ria. I never stopped hoping.
A tear slipped down her cheek as she laughed quietly.
You always were a stubborn one.
I learned from the best.
He teased, a smile evident in his tone. And for the first time in years they laughed together. It was the same, yet different. The sound of two people broken by time but somehow still connected. The world outside seemed to pause in that moment, as if granting them a second chance, a reset. They didn't have all the answers, but the door was open. The air between them felt lighter now, and the distance, though still there, felt surmountable. They spoke for hours that day. No grand confessions, no immediate closure. Just two people, stepping back into the story they had walked away from. The small things came first. The memories, the apologies, the unspoken understandings. When they finally said goodbye, it wasn't with finality. It was with the understanding that this was just the beginning. The beginning of a new chapter, perhaps messier and more fragile than they had hoped, but one where healing wasn't a destination but a process. Later that evening, Ria went back to the cafe, as she had so many times before. But this time it wasn't just a place for writing. It wasn't just a spot to hide. She sat in the corner, sipping her cappuccino, and for the first time in years she felt at peace. She opened her journal and wrote something new.
It's never too late. But sometimes, it takes a little courage to believe it.
And as she wrote, the door chimed. A figure stepped in, familiar but not who she expected. Arif, holding a small bouquet of flowers, a quiet smile on his face.
I thought you might like some company,
he said, walking over to her table. He handed her the flowers with a gentle nod.
I hope this one is a little less dramatic.
Ria smiled, her heart still full.
Thank you.
And in that moment everything felt right. Not perfect but real. And that was enough.